Today I'm bringing you the Sistine Chapel, accompanied by Pierre Jésus on Good Friday. Unfortunately, from my bedroom. Hello everybody. I'm just going to turn that YouTube Pierre Jésus off. Hello everybody and welcome to the Sistine Chapel in my mother's spare room in Dorset rather than Rome, sadly. I hope you're all doing well. Hello Gracie and Ed. I hope you're all enjoying this sunny day. And welcome to this Instagram live. Thank you, lovely bedroom. Hello Mark. Hello Hooked on Coffee. I think that's Kirsty. Hello Kirsty. Hi everyone. So I hope you enjoyed that little view of the Sistine. It was meant to make you feel like you're in there. And a little bit of Pierre Jésus. Great. Hi everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Can you all hear me? Can someone give me a yes that you heard me? It's not Kirsty, it's James. So you can hear me. Great. All right, everyone. Hi. I'll just let a few more people. I can see lots and lots. Yeah, thumbs up. Good. I can see lots of people joining. Hi, Josh. Cool. So we are going to get started. Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Instagram Live brought to you by Travel Curious. My name is Georgia. I'm a tour guide in Rome, Paris and London, and I've been a tour guide for 10 years. Not quite sure how that happened. I am English, but I was born in Germany, grew up all over the world, including India, Kuwait, Italy, Kenya. Went to Hogwarts in England, of course. Not Hogwarts, but a boarding school just down the road from here. And fantastic. It's so nice seeing you all joining. I have a suspicion it's mostly my pals, but wonderful. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Georgia. And I just want to say a big thank you to Alex and all the Travel Curious team for providing these amazing sessions for free and giving us currently out of work tour guides something to do, tell our favourite stories about our favourite places when we all have to stay home, stay safe. And rather than travel curious, we can stay curious. You can follow all the other tours with the hashtag Stay Curious and also find them online. The website is staycurious.tours and they've already got some amazing tours out. Mick in London with espionage, Dara in Dublin about Ireland's road to independence, Sarah in Berlin about the street art. It's all absolutely fantastic stuff. So you can join them on staycurious.tours. As for today's talk with me, my favourite artist is Michelangelo. My favourite chapel is the Sistine. And the reason I wanted to talk to you all about Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel today is that I felt there were quite a lot of parallels and overlaps between Michelangelo's circumstances and our own. So the first parallel, for instance, is today it is Good Friday. It is the most solemn day in the Christian calendar where Christians commemorate the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Now, it is said that Christ was 33 years old when he was crucified. Michelangelo was 33 years old when he was commissioned, indeed I should say commanded, to paint the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel by his patron, Pope Julius II, Il Papa Terrible. Michelangelo really didn't want to paint this ceiling. He thought it was a ruse. He thought it was a ploy, a plot to have him embarrassed next to Raphael. And also painting a ceiling, can you imagine? The whole thing took him 4 years. It's going to get off my chair. And most people think that Michelangelo painted lying down flat on his back. That's not true. He was painting standing up like this, with his shoulders bent back. It was agony, the agony and the ecstasy, as Irving Stone wrote about. And he had these huge knots coming out of his shoulders. He had paint dripping in his eyes. And Michelangelo, at the age of 33, called it his own crucifixion. So that's the first parallel. The second parallel is that the whole of the Sistine ceiling depicts scenes from the Old Testament, which is a part of the Bible that, of course, Christians share with Jews. And this week is also Passover. So I thought that was also a lovely overlap as well. Michelangelo was fascinated in scriptures of all religions. Christianity, of course, Judaism, he was pretty much fluent in all the Jewish texts, Hinduism even, Islam. He was a huge fan of the Sufi poet Rumi, for instance. So he was a hugely intellectual man. And of course, the rock star of the High Renaissance. Michelangelo was born a Florentine, and he never really liked painting. He didn't consider himself a painting, but a sculptor and an architect. And indeed, when he was just a baby, he was given over to a wet nurse who suckled him, and she was married to a stonemason. And Michelangelo, as an adult, would say, half jokingly, half seriously, that it was the milk and beauty that he drank from this wet nurse that gave him his love of marble and stone and the hammer and chisel. So this was a little bit about Michelangelo. Hello everyone, hi Vaughan family, lovely that you're tuning in. Fantastic to see you all, thanks. So that's a little bit about Michelangelo. One thing I will also say while we're here is that I am a tour guide and mostly live in the past. So I am a little bit digitally challenged. So I hope you can all see me okay and hear me okay. I'm also used to talking to a big group of people and it being very interactive and people asking me questions. So this is a entirely new experience for me, and I hope hope you can all hear me okay. Nice detail. Good, thanks. Hi, Jimmy. Hi, Mo. Hi, Irina. So yeah, a little bit of a new experience for me, and I hope you're all keeping up so far. If you've got any questions about anything that I'm saying, thanks. If you've got any questions about what I'm saying, please just pop them in, and I'll see if I can keep up with them. It's coming up on my left-hand side, and I will do my best to answer. So, where did I get to? A few parallels between Michelangelo and it being Good Friday. And as I was saying, Michelangelo loved sculpture and masonry. By 1508, when Pope Julius II came to commission Michelangelo to paint the ceiling, Michelangelo was already famous for being a sculptor. He had already sculpted his David. Have any of you seen David in Florence? Yeah, he captures my heart as well. I just saw a flurry of hearts. And the Pietà, which is, of course, housed inside St. Peter's Basilica. And I would exchange all the treasures of the Vatican for the Pietà. Let me bring it up for you. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry, I don't have a selfie stick. So let's have a quick look. Michelangelo had already sculpted the magnificent Pietà in his early 20s. And, he spent an entire year just polishing the torso of Christ. That's why it looks like, when you're looking at it in the marble flesh, so to speak, it looks like Christ is sort of glowing from within. And I think that's a rather appropriate image to show on Good Friday. So this is what Michelangelo was famous for. And when I say he thought it was a plot to humiliate him painting a ceiling, it's because he was the proven sculptor, and in 1508, Raphael, that other rock star of the Renaissance, along with the other two Ninja Turtles, Leonardo, Donatello, was a proven painter. So Michelangelo thought that he was being set up for failure, basically. Well, little did they all know that he would get his own back. But as I said, he never wanted to paint the Sistine ceiling, and when he was commissioned to, he actually ran away from Rome. Not once, but twice. He ran away in the dead of night towards his native Florence, because when he got there, that's where the Pope's jurisdiction ended, and he'd be safe. But no, Julius got wind of it. He sent his Swiss guards off in pursuit. They captured him, arrested him, and brought him back to Rome, where Michelangelo fled again away to Florence, and again was captured by the Swiss guard, arrested, brought back to Rome, and when on arriving in Rome, they arrived at the northern gate of Rome, Piazza del Popolo, and Michelangelo rode in on his white mule, trotting into the centre of Piazza del Popolo. There he got off his white mule. He was famous for riding around Rome on his white mule. Got off the white mule, got out a huge piece of rope, picked it up and put it around his neck like a noose, held it like this, and then stomped on foot all the way to the Vatican towards what would be his 4-year incarceration in almost total isolation in the Sistine Chapel, painting that ceiling. So there's another parallel. I think Michelangelo would empathise with all of us right now during this coronavirus pandemic about being isolated, forced quarantine. He'd also empathise about this epidemic. One of his brothers died of the plague. So there he did. He ran off to Florence, dragged back kicking and screaming, and then came into the Sistine Chapel. Now, the first thing about the Sistine Chapel, and let me just show you what it looked like before Michelangelo got his mitts all over it. It was built before he was even born by Pope Sixtus IV, Sixtus Sistine Chapel. Can you see it? It looks a bit like, sorry, I was reading everyone's questions. Was he paid well? Yes, but like all artists, he struggled to get payment from the Pope on time. I think any artist, actor or whatever will empathise with that. So yeah, that's the Sistine Chapel from the outside. It looks a bit more like a fortress than a chapel. And when it was first commissioned by Pope Sixtus IV, who happened to be, by the way, the uncle of Pope Julius II, so Julius was his nipote, nephew in Italian. Can anyone tell me what nipote sounds like? Anyone? Nepotism. That's where we get it from, the sort of Renaissance practice of promoting family members to high up positions within the church or wherever, politics. And this is what the Sistine Chapel, this is a pen and ink sort of drawing of what it looked like originally. Can you see the ceiling is pretty plain? It was a lapis. Well done. Yes, everyone. Nepotism. Yes, Mark, Karen. Perfect. Clever people. The ceiling was blue. The blue was created by crushing lapis lazuli and turning it into a paint pigment and then covered in gold stars to symbolise the cosmos and the heavens and the universe. So that's what the ceiling first looked like. And then it was these side panels that old Sixtus IV commissioned from the kind of first wave of Renaissance artists. Renaissance, by the way, means, I'm sure you all know this anyway, rebirth. It was this period 500 years ago of the rebirth of classical civilization, of the ancient sort of Greco-Roman sculpture, art, philosophy, writing, etc. So Sixtus commissioned this first wave of artists to paint the side panels, which depict the life of Christ and the life of Moses. And you can just see here, these are some of the images of Moses. You can see crossing the Red Sea. And these paintings were done by artists such as, I don't know, have you heard of Botticelli? Have you heard of Perugino, who taught Raphael to paint? Ghirlandaio, who taught Michelangelo to paint. Well, Michelangelo didn't really like him very much and actually got into a bit of bout of fisticuffs as a teenager in the studio of Ghirlandaio. It's why his nose was permanently out of joint. It got punched, permanently out of joint, both physically and metaphorically, shall we say. So that was the first wave. By 1508, you had those side panels, you had this wonderful ceiling of blue and gold stars, and then Michelangelo comes in to get painting. Let's have a look at the ceiling. Oh, let me show you a couple of pictures, actually. Oh, my laptop's gone to sleep, sorry, bear with me. You might want to see what, for instance, Pope Julius looked like. Let me bring him up. Il Papa Terrible was his nickname, the warrior pope. Let me turn this around. There we go. Oh, look at him. This is a portrait, very famous portrait by Raphael of Il Papa Terrible himself. And he was known as the warrior pope because Julius, like his namesake, Julius Caesar, whose spirit he seemed to channel through his 10-year reign, he wanted to make Rome the caput mundi once more, the head of the world. See, Rome by 1503 was the shabby second cousin of Florence, and Julius wanted to put that right. Hence, he started building the new St. Peter's Basilica, which would take 126 years to complete. Hence, he commissioned the great rock stars to paint his private apartments and private chapel. And he even literally took off his papal tiara, put on his helmet and led troops into battle to regain the lost papal states of Bologna and things like that. So pretty unusual behaviour for a pope. Anyway, Michelangelo then, as I say, comes to Rome. And if you want to know what Michelangelo looked like, I'm sure you all do anyway, but let's try and bring him up. Let me, I hope this is going okay. Sorry, my hands are shaking a little bit because I'm nervous. There we go. Self-portrait of Michelangelo, a little bit older than 33 there, of course. Now, this is really interesting. This is a little cartoon he did of himself painting the Sistine Chapel. This, I'm going to read you the poem in a minute. He sent a poem to a great pal of his, Giovanni, about his experience of painting the Sistine Chapel. So let's go to the ceiling. Our ceiling is 20 metres high. Oh, thanks, guys. You're all lovely. It's 20 metres high. So the first challenge Michelangelo experienced was to reach the darn thing in the first place. So, sorry, I had to see my room. Embarrassing. The first thing he had to do was reach the thing. And he built a scaffold to reach it, a huge scaffold, which took up about a third of the chapel. It had a huge wooden platform at the top that he would stand on to paint. And it would have a huge, great sort of canvas sheet, like a sail, beneath it. And this was to do two things: to prevent the wet paint from dripping onto the beautiful, priceless cosmatesque marble floor, and also to, of course, stop people looking at his work as well. So Michelangelo took 4 years to paint the ceiling. Can you imagine painting a ceiling for 4 years? Just imagine the agony. And let me quickly talk you through it. So we have, there it is in all its glory. Wonderful, wonderful. And what we have are these scenes from the Old Testament, as I mentioned. We've got prophets from the Old Testament, like the prophet Jeremiah down there. We've got Jonah above the altar instead of Jesus. Can anyone tell me why Michelangelo painted Jonah above the altar? Any ideas? Well, today's the clue, actually. Today's the clue. So I'm looking at these comments. Today's the clue. Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, or in this case, according to Michelangelo, the big trout. And of course, Christ spent 3 days and 3 nights in his tomb. So we've got Jonah, we've got the other prophets of the Old Testament, we've got Christ's ancestors, and we've got the story of Genesis, the creation, God separating the dark from the light, God creating the sun, moon and plants, more on that later, God separating the land from the seas, the mega one, you all know this, the creation of Adam, the E.T., there we go. The creation of Eve, Adam looking a bit miserable, slumped in his corner. We've got, the temptation and expulsion from the Garden of Eden. We have the story of Noah. And we've got a couple of Old Testament stories in the corners there as well. There is, upside down, David about to sever the head of Goliath. There is another severed head, Judith and Holofernes. And let's go back to the story of Noah. So it starts the opposite way around. We've got the drunkenness of Noah, yep, the flood, and the sacrifice of Noah. So as I come out, can anyone tell me, because you see the first 3 panels of Noah took Michelangelo an entire year to paint, and then just 3 years to paint the rest of it. Just 3 years to paint the rest of it. What's the difference between the panels of Noah and the rest? Give you a couple of seconds to think about it. I think there's a slight delay on the comments. So for those of you who got it right, well done. Let's quickly look at the flood. There are over 60 figures in this painting. Can you see it's also not the ark? It looks to me like the Sistine Chapel at the back there. And let's go to the first panel of God. See how God takes up the entire panel, whereas 60 people take up just one panel up here. So what's going on? Well done, Alex. who happens to be a tour guide himself and one of the CEOs of Travel Curious. The people are much smaller. The scenes of Noah are absolutely tiny, actually. So after a year of painting these scenes, Michelangelo clambers off that scaffold. Don't forget, he hadn't really seen them before because you had the sail, the great canvas sheet, takes away the canvas sheet, looks up. Oh no, it's too small. You can't see them properly from 20 metres beneath. So he realised he'd sized them too small. He realised he needed to make everything bigger, and also because it was going to take him 3 lifetimes to complete the rest of the chapel if he stuck to this sizing. And he knew it, and let's face it, he was pretty put out about it. And you remember that little cartoon I showed you of Michelangelo painting that's him, that's his handwriting. And the poem that he wrote to Good Giovanni goes like this after he'd seen his error. He says, I'm not going to read the whole poem, but just bits of it. It's my belly that's beyond concealing. It hangs beneath my chin like peeling. On my face, the paint's congealing. Loins concertinaed in my gut. I drop an arse as counterweight and move without the help of eyes. Like a skinned martyr. Remember that. Like a skinned martyr, I abut on air, and wrinkled show my fate. Bow-like, I strain towards the skies. No wonder then I size things crookedly. I'm on all fours. Bent blowpipes send their darts off course. And then at the end he writes, defend my labour's cause, good Giovanni, from all strictures. I live in hell and paint its pictures. So I think that gives us an idea as to how Michelangelo viewed the Vatican and Pope Julius at the end of this year of torture. Not only was he bent over like this and trying to size things, but also the ceiling is vaulted, it's curved. So that added a new dimension of difficulty for the maestro as well. So after 4 years, he's got them down, he's got Noah. Thank you for the claps. He's got Noah down, and then he realised everything just needs to be a little bit bigger. So let's talk you through the whole story then. As I mentioned, here's God taking up that whole panel, the full panel, as opposed to the flood. And then the next scene. Now this scene, the creation of the sun, moon, and the plants. Can you all see that? This panel sits above the altar, where of course, more detail about what, Lazule? Just ask another question and I'll answer it. This panel sits directly above the altar. Now, of course, who would stand at the altar in his own chapel? The Pope. Who was the Pope? Pope Julius II. Who did Michelangelo intensely dislike at this point in his career? Pope Julius II. Julius had taken him off his major project of sculpting the tomb. Julius had made him paint the ceiling. And so if you look carefully, there are actually 2 moons in this panel. So here's God creating the sun and the moon. And here is God creating the plants. Now, can you imagine if you're Julius standing at the altar in prayer, leading worship to the faithful, and perhaps you feel like looking up for a little bit of divine inspiration, what would you see? That's right. God mooning you. So Michelangelo's little joke there. God mooning the Pope. The other thing about Michelangelo, you'll have noticed that he loves the male nude, specifically the male nude as opposed to the female nude. Back in those days, you didn't really have female models anyway. But Michelangelo was, yes, homosexual, which was completely illegal, of course, in Renaissance Rome. But he got away with it because it was the Renaissance. It was this rebirth of the male nude, the statues that would all over the Vatican that inspired him to paint these ignudi that are on the wall. They're absolutely beautiful. They surround all of the panels. Absolutely stunning. And of course, beautiful, beautiful Adam in all his glory there. So even for women, if we look a bit closely now at Eve, she's pretty butch. I'll take you over to St. Catherine on the Last Judgment. Can you see how muscular they all are? We'll come back to the Last Judgment. But I just want to point out St. Catherine. Cool, blimey. She's been busting out some muscle busting, hasn't she? And over here. Yep. So Michelangelo's women are basically men with boobs. And he loves these ignudi. And he became absolutely brilliant at depicting the... sorry, I'm being distracted by the comments. It's fantastic. He became an absolute expert at the human anatomy. Does anyone know how he became an expert? That's why all the women look like truck drivers, yeah. I won't argue with that one. He became an expert because he illegally employed grave robbers to exhume cadavers and bring them to his workshop kind of in the dead of night, where he would sort of continue with the gruesome job of dissecting them and painting parts of the anatomy. So he became an expert anatomist, and we actually get over 60 terms, anatomical terms, from Michelangelo about the human anatomy. And he knew how things functioned as well. And we can see this no more clearly than on the Sistine ceiling. So let me show you what I mean by that. In the panel depicting... It's not a particularly famous one. It's God separating the land from the seas. Yeah. If you look at God's cloak, though, sorry for my shaking hand, there we go. It's actually the cross-section of a kidney. And this is really interesting because Michelangelo suffered with kidney problems and gallstones all his life. And it shows that he also knew the function of the kidney, separating blood and water and urine, etc. So isn't that interesting? And then the one you've all been waiting for, the creation of Adam. Now then, let's be honest, this is a misnomer. What do I mean by that? Adam's already been created. He exists in all his physical glory. But he's not yet complete. What's wrong with him? Look at how, I mean, he's very handsome, of course he is, but look how vacant he looks. There's nothing going on between the ears, is there? And if you look also at his finger, can you see how floppy it is? Contrasted with God's pointy finger, the active finger. So this is the moment of creation where Adam has been created, but he is yet to be imbued with knowledge and free will. Bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that I've just told you that Michelangelo was an anatomical expert, can anyone tell me what you think the shape of God's cloak behind him is? Can anyone guess that? Well, it could look like a heart, I guess. It's about to give him life. But he's really about to give him knowledge and free will, consciousness. Where does knowledge come from? The brain. And this cloak, this shape, is heart, shell. Yeah, I mean, you can see the heart, but it's really the brain. It's the cross-section of a human brain, and it's a very accurate one. If you dissect your brain, well done, Justin. Well done, James. Yeah, very good. If you dissect your brain, it's got 12 facets to it. And if you count the number of heads in there, there are 12. So it's an anatomically accurate cross-section of the human brain. How cool is that? What's also cool about it is, of course, that Michelangelo wasn't allowed to be dissecting dead bodies. He had no business knowing the cross-section of a human brain. So I just sort of love the fact that he's put it right in the centre of the ceiling, at the heart of the Vatican. Then, of course, we've got the creation of Eve, and I'll focus just on the temptation as well. Let's have a quick look at this. Sorry. Here. Now, there's a lot going on in this panel, so much that this panel actually inspired me to write a book, which has taken me 4 years to write. So I'm not going to give away all my secrets about this, but I will just point out a few things. Let's look at what's going on. So we've got Adam and Eve here on the left, in Eden, in paradise, looking youthful and vigorous and muscular. And you can see that perhaps the serpent interrupted them, enjoying themselves. I'll let you guess what I'm talking about in terms of Eve's positioning in relation to Adam. And you can also see, Eve is the man with boobs, but also that, yes, the serpent is tempting Eve, but look, Adam is reaching over for the fig as well. Now, Michelangelo paints a fig tree in accordance with Jewish tradition, not the Christian apple. And what I love about this is that Michelangelo he's been dubbed very often a misogynist, a hater of women because he was gay. But I don't know about you, but most of my male best friends are gay, and they're not misogynists. And I think the same with Michelangelo. He had some really, really close friendships with women such as Vittoria Colonna in his life, with whom he was a great letter writer. And the image of Adam and Eve, what I think here is going on is that, yes, Eve is the one taking the offering from the serpent, but Adam is just as engaged here. He's reaching over, an equal partner in this so-called fall. So I think that's really quite interesting. The easiest and cheapest way to visit a museum, absolutely. So for those of you who missed what I was getting at, there's Adam reaching over for the forbidden fruit just as much as Eve is. And also, in terms of what they were interrupted doing, well, I'm going to leave that to your imagination because I think that's fairly obvious. So then there's the serpent, and there's the angel banishing them, for having committed original sin into the wilderness. And you can see here they're looking old and withered and miserable as they leave Eden into the wilderness. You'll also see, so the serpent is offering the fig, which is the symbol of femininity. And you'll also see that the angel is shooing them away with the sword, symbol of masculinity. And the most subversive thing really is the angel and the serpent. If you look, they are two sides of the same coin, the fig and the sword. If you look at their faces, they are twins. The serpent is female, just about. The angel is male. And actually, if you look very closely and look at the bottom, can you see his knee becomes part of the coil? Very, very interesting. I'm going to leave it there because there's a lot more to say about that panel, but lots and lots of subversive secrets in there, as you can see. So panning out, those are the major panels. All right. And then, does anyone have any questions about what I've just said so far? As I wait I think there's a slight delay when it comes to questions and comments. So there's the whole of the ceiling. And I'm going to move us over to the side panels now as well. Because, just turning around. Hi guys. Because the side panels which Michelangelo painted of the prophets and the ancestors of Christ are also really, really interesting. When Michelangelo was finally finished with the ceiling in 1512, and the canvas sheet was taken away, and everyone could finally look up and see this Technicolor glory, this masterpiece, Pope Julius wanted Michelangelo to add a bit of gold to the robes. Sorry, my bad. Add a bit of gold to the robes of the ancestors of Christ. He said they look too poor. Michelangelo's response to this, he said it with a smile, but I think it's pretty political. He said, well, these men were poor. And so it stayed. He managed to turn it into a joke, so Julius agreed with him. The question was, did he get into trouble with the church for some of these depictions? The answer to that, Julie, great question, is No. And I'll tell you why. Because I've just gone through each panel individually, dissecting them individually, right? Not many people who go into the Sistine Chapel without a tour guide, you'll just look up and see this amazing, amazing ceiling. And don't forget, you're 20 metres down. You're not looking with binoculars at it. And certainly Julius, who was going blind by 1512, he'd die the year later, it would have been a sort of coloury blur to him. How Michelangelo got away with that I'm just about to come to, actually. So, no, he didn't get into trouble, interestingly. And I think what's even more interesting about the, God mooning the Pope, for instance, or if we go to here, you can see the prophet Jeremiah. Now, he is situated, again, just above the altar. And if we look really closely at Jeremiah, you can see that it is a disguised self-portrait of Michelangelo himself. He's aged himself a bit. He doesn't look like he's in his 30s, but in his 60s. Can you see Jeremiah, the prophet that accused religious leaders of corruption, pointing the finger down? And he's wearing Michelangelo's very own muddy boots. Interesting. And the other thing about using Christ's ancestors, and again, this is super interesting, is that in Renaissance Rome, the Jews were welcomed, but not exactly warmly, and they were made to wear clothing with markers, yellow markers on them to signify their Jewishness. And if we look here at, see, this wasn't obvious before the cleaning. Let me quickly show you. See that black patch just there? See that black patch just there? This is how blackened and dirty and dark the Sistine Chapel had become by the 1980s. And then the restoration of the Sistine Chapel was all about scrubbing off this dark soot and wax from 500 years of candle smoke. And only then, with it rubbed off, could they see the bright colours. Only then, with the soot wiped off, could you see this. Can you see the marker that Michelangelo put on one of Christ's ancestors? The same marker, that round, just trying to, there. Should have redone my nail varnish. Yeah, so that's really quite subversive, isn't it? So there we go. Michelangelo pointing the finger at Julius, one of Christ's ancestors wearing the same marker that Jews of Renaissance Rome had to wear as well. And so, no, he didn't get into trouble. And the reason for that is because he was very good at attacking the Pope while seeming to flatter the Pope. One thing I will leave you with on the ceiling before we'll quickly talk about the Last Judgment is that at the very head of the chapel, one of the prophets that Michelangelo painted, if I can find it, I should be able to find it. Sorry, I managed to take sorry everyone, here it is. One of the prophets that Michelangelo painted, I was going to put the phone down so that I can show you. This is the prophet Zechariah, and he is positioned right at the end of the Sistine Chapel as we enter, but directly above the doorway that the Pope would enter from. So the prophet Zechariah is a really interesting one. He's one of the lesser known prophets of the Old Testament. He's a prophet who preached interreligious tolerance, interesting, above Pope Julius's doorway. And he's the Pope so Michelangelo put Zacharias there. And how he gets away with painting Zacharias is that he's actually a hidden portrait of Pope Julius. Can you see he's bald with a beard? Also, Pope Julius came from the Della Rovere family. Their coat of arms was an oak tree, and you'll see oak and acorns all over the Sistine Chapel in deference to the Della Rovere dynasty. And their family colours was this gold, this red, and that blue. So obviously this is a huge, huge portrait of Zacharias, but really a huge portrait of Julius. So you can imagine Pope Julius coming in 1512 after 4 years of not being able to see Michelangelo paint, and Michelangelo, don't forget, kept himself to himself. He even ground his own paints, everyone. He didn't like anyone in there with him. He plastered up the ceiling, 3 layers of plaster. 1, let it dry. 2, let it dry. 3, it's still wet. Quick, get painting. He'd stick these cartone on with pinpricks around the the outline, cover it with dried ox blood, peel off the cartoon, paint in between the lines, and eventually started painting freestyle, revolutionising the whole concept of fresco. So Julius comes in, he's going blind in 1512, he looks up, he's dazzled by what he sees, and then you can just sort of think, oh, I wonder what Michelangelo put above my doorway. Oh, marvellous. Me. So it was an act of flattery, but if you look much more closely, much more closely, can you all see? So there is Julius. Can you see these two little cheruby type figures, these putti as they're called? These putti. They look very sweet, don't they? And they're peering over the shoulder of the prophet, who's really the Pope. And can you see this little chap has his hand over his pal's shoulder? You all see that? And can you see there's a little sort of shadow between his fingers? That is because he's making this gesture. It's the thumb between the index finger and the middle finger like this. And you might be thinking now, do you bite your thumb at me, sir? No, sir. This gesture, the thumb between the fingers like this, was called giving someone the fig in Renaissance Rome. It was the equivalent, I'm sure you've guessed it, of giving someone the finger, basically. So this is Michelangelo, both seeming to flatter and at the same time really having a go at Pope Julius as well. So that's the ceiling, everybody. 4 years trapped up on that place, painting away, and it's now become one of the wonders of the world. Any questions before we quickly move on to the Last Judgment, because you're probably all terribly bored by now of my face and voice. Let me know if any questions. I'm just trying to think if I've left anything out, probably quite a lot, but he was so naughty, Isabella. He was so naughty. It gets even naughtier, you'll be pleased to hear, in the Last Judgment. So shall we have a little look at the Last Judgment, everyone? Cool, alrighty. Let's go. Let me turn it around. Cool, okay. The Last Judgment. Cheeky cherubs, absolutely, Sarah. Great tour of Berlin, by the way. Okay, so here is the Last Judgment. Now, Michelangelo was in his 30s when he came to paint the ceiling. And poor chap was in his 60s when he came to paint the Last Judgment. And it took him nearly 6 years. So the guy spent a decade quarantined, isolated in the Sistine Chapel. 10 years. Most of us will spend 20 minutes in there, if that. So next time you're in there, appreciate it took 10 years, all of this. Now, the Last Judgment, I suspect, is, you might be thinking, is a pretty shocking painting to have in a Roman Catholic chapel, don't you think? There are 392 figures on this painting. 392 figures on this painting. And when Michelangelo first painted it, 1536 to 1541, they were all nude, every single one of them, naked as the day they were born. You can imagine that walking into a chapel like this, faced with 392 extremely muscular and extremely nude, muscular men in quite close proximity to each other, was a little bit shocking, perhaps. But because it was the great Michelangelo, perhaps it wasn't so shocking after all. So I'll turn it around a little bit. So the Last Judgment, as I say, 6 years, 392 nude muscular figures, focusing, of course, on the Judgment Day with Christ in the middle there. Also, we've got the righteous coming up here on Christ's right, the righteous being raised to the heavens, the sinners being thrown to hell. And up in heaven, we have all the righteous and the martyred saints, which I'll take you through in just a moment. And down here in hell, this is one of Dante's circles of hell. Michelangelo, hugely inspired by Dante Alighieri, sort of Florence's equivalent of Shakespeare and his version of Hell, the Inferno. And here we go. Is it a fair representation of the physique of that time? That's a really good question. No, it's not. It's a really good representation of classical sculpture. Don't forget Michelangelo of the Renaissance, the rebirth of classical civilization. They were inspired by the sculpture of the ancients, which tended to be heroes like Hercules, gods like Zeus or Jupiter, as he was known in Rome, who were all really muscular and athletic, or sometimes svelte and muscular like the Ignudi on the ceiling. But Michelangelo's taste clearly becomes more buff as he gets older. And so, no, in general, I think people in the Renaissance were either skinny because they were malnourished or fat like the Borgia Pope because they overate. So probably not such a fair representation. Thanks for that question. Lovely one. So no, they look more like ancient Greco-Roman muscular heroes, I think, rather than real people. All right, so let's go to this painting and talk through it. So we've got, let me bring it up. We've got, isn't it weird seeing my finger? It looks like we're in the chapel. So there's Christ, the judge. And if you look at Christ, he doesn't look like Jesus really, does he? He looks like Apollo. Michelangelo was inspired by two statues that you'll see inside the Vatican museums. The Apollo Belvedere for Christ's portrait and the Belvedere torso for his muscular torso. Or even the Laocoon as well, raising his hands, and the snakes and the serpents with his twin boys. There's Mary. You can see Mary not quite so meek and mild with that bicep bulging. And you can see he's looking down towards these martyred saints. Have a look at these guys, pretty muscular. There's John the Baptist. There's St. Lawrence holding his gridiron. He was grilled alive. He is now the patron saint of barbecues, for real. There is St. Bartholomew, carrying his own skin. St. Bartholomew was one of the apostles who was flayed alive for being a Christian. I got to tell you, if a Roman soldier came running after me going, "A Christian, skin her!" I'm like, I'm sorry, what? I believe in Zeus. Anyway, there's Bartholomew holding his own skin. He is the patron saint of taxidermists, for real. There's St. Peter with the keys. There's St. Simon with the saw chopped into bits. St. Blaise with the wool combs. He was raked to death. There's St. Catherine with the wheel. St. Sebastian with the arrows. There we go. I'll come back to St. Bartholomew in a moment, but I just want to point out that all these guys were completely nude. Now, during the 1500s, we of course had something called the Protestant Reformation. 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to Wittenberg Cathedral door, and this sparked the Reformation. And one of the things the church did to counter the Reformation was launch the Counter-Reformation, and this included the censorship of art. The censorship of art. What I mean by that is throughout Europe, throughout these amazing places like the Vatican, these nude statues of athletic, muscular men were censored. This was called the fig leaf treatment. So you had this army of men with hammer and chisel going around these statues, chiseling them off and covering them up with plastered fig leaves. This was called the fig leaf treatment and also the Great Castration. I find this a fascinating fact because it does mean that somewhere in the Vatican archives, there's a really big box full of 2,000-year-old marble willies. What a thought. So, this painting, yes, it was considered shocking, but Michelangelo was too much of a big figure. I have to say, Michelangelo was he was as much of a rock star in his own day. He was as famous in his own day as he is with us today. So nobody dared censor The Last Judgment while he was still alive. After The Last Judgment, that is when they started to censor this painting full of of news. Let me show you what they did. So you can see here, you had these these wispy loincloths covering up people's modesty, right? You can see John the Baptist sporting a really trendy camel skin thong, and a few other thongs as well. There we go. Wonderful. St. Catherine wearing a bright green dress. And here we go. Let's go back to St. Bartholomew, the apostle who was skinned alive. Can you see something rather interesting about St. Bartholomew, everybody? I should be on TV. Oh, that's really kind. Thank you very much. Tell the BBC. Let's have a look at St. Bartholomew. Can anyone tell me the difference between St. Bartholomew, the body, and St. Bartholomew, the skin? Interesting. They're different, aren't they? See, Bartholomew's bald with a beard, but the face on his skin, black curly hair and a black curly beard. Really interesting, because this is where, oops, sorry, it's my bedroom. Michelangelo included a self-portrait on the dead, sagging skin of St. Bartholomew. During the Renaissance, it was very unusual for for painters to sign their work. Their work was always presented as by the person who paid for it, the patron. So often instead they included a self-portrait. And I think it's so interesting that in his 60s, painting again in the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo includes his own self-portrait in his 60s as the dead, sagging face of St. Bartholomew. I think it gives us an extraordinary insight into his mind, into his psyche, into his mood, which I think wasn't a very good mood. Now, the other theory is, which you will find in a book called The Sistine Secrets by a very good friend of mine, Roy Doliner, is that he believes Michelangelo is also sort of hidden the face of his beloved, a man called Tommaso Cavalieri. Tommaso was the love of Michelangelo's life. He wrote some really amazing poetry to him. And what we think, perhaps, is this, that the man just behind St. Bartholomew is the portrait profile of Tommaso Cavalieri. And the reason Roy believes this is if you got a ruler and drew a straight line between Tommaso and Michelangelo's eyes, it's a straight line, and also under the gaze of Jesus, the judge, Christ the judge, a sort of a blessing in an age where their love, of course, would be condemned. I'd also like to point out Michelangelo, do you remember, was fluent in Islamic texts and Jewish texts? See up here, these two guys? This is a Jewish man. Jewish men often had to wear hats with devil's horns on them to signify their Jewishness, and he's up in heaven. And this guy looks like a Moorish trader of some kind, perhaps from Turkey or something. So Michelangelo's put Moors and Jews up there as well as the Christian martyrs, as well as perhaps his beloved, Tommaso. And yet, interestingly, he's chosen to paint the hell of the Sodomites. Now, the word sodomite is, of course, extraordinarily rude and politically incorrect today, but I use it in the context of the Renaissance. Inspired by Dante, here we have, as I say, the righteous going up to heaven, and over here, and you see, what's interesting is that the righteous also could quite easily be homosexual. And here we've got the fiery hell, Chiron the boatman. Over here, all those being taken to hell, thrown into the pit. And here, you can see why some things had to be covered up. Goodness me, that looks to me like a moneylender. Whoop. You can see here, this fellow with the donkey's ears, the ass's ears, this guy was called Minos. Yes, Karen, it's a new theory in a book called The Sistine Secrets by Roy Dolan. I'll write it in the comments underneath the video. But what's not new is that Michelangelo wrote many, many poems to Tommaso. We absolutely know definitely that they totally loved each other. Anyway, so back to the Hell of the Sodomites. There they are. Ding, 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 ding. And there is Minos. Back to me. Hi, guys. So there's a lot going on in this painting, and actually I could spend an hour talking about it, but I won't because we're coming up towards quite a long time now. And what's really interesting about this hell, as I said, it shows to me that Michelangelo was perhaps maybe a bit conflicted, maybe different influences in his life. We know in Florence, for instance, he was really influenced a little bit by this mad monk Savonarola. Different critics have, Alex has just mentioned Martin Luther. Now, two different, my pleasure, Karen, two different explanations of this particular little fellow down here. Let me show you. Dunk, dunk, dunk. Where is he? This chap here, right at the bottom of the ginormous painting. This could be either Savonarola, perhaps, or Martin Luther. Perhaps Michelangelo's undecided whether Savonarola, who's this mad monk preaching from the pulpit in Florence in the 1400s, or of course Martin Luther of the 1500s, to hell or heaven, whither will they go? Not sure. But anyway, let me just take you back to this guy here. Because when Michelangelo finally finished this painting in 1541, under the auspices of Pope Paul III Farnese, there was, of course, a mighty opening ceremony to celebrate the Last Judgment. And just before I go on with that story, I just want to point out as well how massive Jonah, do you remember Jonah and the trout? He's 7 times life size. See these feet? Almost the same size as the whole of Jesus. So enormous. Anyway, the painting was unveiled. There was a huge ceremony to obviously celebrate Michelangelo's latest achievement in the now complete Sistine Chapel, with the Genesis, the ancestors of Christ, and now the Last Judgment. Oh my goodness, is that 24 seconds remaining? Yes, very quickly then. This guy was called Biagio. He was the Pope's master of ceremonies. He came in, he said, this painting belongs in a brothel, not a chapel. Michelangelo got his own back by painting, 10 seconds, my gosh, by painting ass's ears onto his ears, a snake around his torso, which is biting down really quite hard, as you can see. Hi everyone.